Hi, everyone. Welcome to Yachting International Radio. I have a very special guest and friend of mine, Damien, who is the co-founder of the Aroha Retreat. Most of you would have seen on my Instagram story my journey. I was fortunate to go back to Aroha, I think about a month ago now, and there was a lot of interest from crew who are the experience was absolutely phenomenal, and obviously that they could see that through my Instagram story, and they're very curious to know about the retreat and what it offers. And I know that there's a really interesting backstory to that. So welcome, Damien. And today we're going to be talking about wellness and mental health, and hopefully provide you with some strategies on how you can manage it through this difficult period. But yeah, I just want to hand it over to Damien to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about Aroha and where did it begin and its vision and mission.
Okay, thanks, Corinne. It's funny, I've been thinking about this podcast a bit lately, and I think the work you're doing is probably more widely applicable than it was just a few months ago, because so many people are in confined spaces. Yeah, so I am the co-founder of Aroha Wellness Retreat. This was a dream that started percolating up in my world about 15 years ago. I started working in health and wellness, running retreats, and I started to notice the magic of what can happen within a consistent space of practice. And worked for a company called the Ashram for a while, an amazing retreat center in Los Angeles. Started a company called Chrysalis Retreats. We were doing pop-up wellness adventures in various places with featured educators and that sort of thing. And I've just basically spent the last 15 years playing within the retreat sphere. So I do a bit of teaching, a bit of facilitating. I've probably personally moved my interest from the physical, body slowly over to the internal space. And I am more intrigued and stimulated these days by what happens between our ears than necessarily what happens in our biceps or pecs or something of that sort. So that's been the journey. About, let's see, now almost a decade ago, this project was born from a friend of mine, Chris Madison, and I. We were just sitting down, and I was looking around at the wellness world and the retreat world, and I was just noticing that most retreats do a great job of focusing on your personal physical health, and there's a multitude of different ways that they go about it. And what I noticed was that very few were paying attention to the greater holistic sphere of well-being. So paying attention to where your food comes from, where your waste goes, how your energy arrives, how you create shelter, and just the basic fundamentals of life. And I do think as a human species, ultimately, we're going to have to pay attention. I think we're seeing what happens when 7.8 trillion or a billion people on the planet are a little bit blind to the effects of their day-to-day living. And so I think wellness more and more and more is becoming truly holistic in its requests and its requirements. And so Aroha was born out of that. I basically thought, well, what if we tried to create a wellness retreat that embodied as much as we could at the time and took as many steps forward as we possibly could in terms of, looking at the way that we as humans relate to our environment, both external and internal. So about 6 years ago, we opened, and yeah, you've been on a couple of retreats. We run 6 and 8 day wellness intensives or adventures, as we like to call them. And they essentially incorporate a whole bunch of healthy practices. So you're not necessarily being kind of, I guess, overwhelmed or kind of, it's not too intense in any one particular aspect, but we're working with nature and movement and meditation and massage and nutrition and digital detox and, all sorts of areas that just help us to be healthy monkeys.
I know with the last retreat that I went on, the participants, or the people who attended the retreat, they were already emailing each other, and they were discussing about coming back together as a group for the next one the following year. And I think that's how powerful it is. You walk away feeling absolutely rejuvenated and inspired, and you can't wait to get your next fix. So that's really powerful to show you how something like that can be so life-changing.
Yeah. I mean, the human component of it is big. At the ashram, years ago, one of the things I noticed was that we were working with an A-list clientele, so it's like Hollywood was showing up along with everyone else, but we just had this kind of high-end clientele. It wasn't a terribly cheap experience either, but we were doing it in a very low-key way. And in general, what would happen is people would come in and you would see that, I'd say fairly normal, but the boundary of being a normal human these days, kind of there, almost a wall. And then we would all come into this space where everyone was treated the same. There were no VIPs. There was nothing you could add or take away. There was no way to kind of brag about or kind of create or kind of feed the ego, if you will. And so everyone was brought down to the same level. And then you would just watch as group after group went through this metamorphosis of returning home and just being human and relaxing the shoulders and, allowing, genuine enjoyment and laughter to come back. And it was always, and still is, amazing to me that you can get vastly different backgrounds coming together, different ages, sex, creed, color, you name it, all sorts of people that will come together, and underneath all that stuff that seems so different, we're actually very similar, and there's always a really great potential for connection. So
have you
still
heard,
there for us at Aroha.
Yeah. Have you heard of any stories from past clients who have done a retreat and reported back a life-changing experience?
Yeah, there's a wide array. And I welcome all of it. I think it's hilarious. Like, so there's, so people leave almost always on kind of a really clear high that, reminds them of why they're here on Earth. And then there's a variety of responses. One of them you could characterize as like straight to the pub. That does happen, where I've had phone calls with people like 30 minutes after they've left, and they're into their first bottle of Bordeaux and a big steak, and they're just kind of retoxing, we call it, which is fine. I think there's a lot of value in just kind of doing the extremes and kind of really, pushing into your bubble a little bit. And through that pushing into the bubble, I think you get a greater sense of how your choices are affecting you. So I don't mind that response. And then I would say there's also those that really create, I'd say, lasting change, at least 6 months or a year, if not, lifetimes of change, where maybe they're just letting go of one bad habit. That Diet Coke every day at lunch, could be one change where they just kind of get rid of a toxic load of some sort. But some people, don't look the same. You'll see them a year later. There's definitely a percentage of our clientele where this is the beginning of a lifelong change, and they'll come back year after year, and you just kind of see them, almost reversing age, as they come back slimmer and healthier. And I think even Chris, my business partner, might say he was one of those people at first. At first, he would have been the kind of, to have a Bordeaux. And I think from his first experience, he didn't think he'd ever do anything like that again. And then, now he's probably healthier than he was 15 years ago when we met.
Yeah, he actually shared quite a powerful story to me, because he told me about his first experience in the States going to a retreat. And I think he said he just normally he would just, go have a drink to take off the tension. And he noticed then, okay, there's something quite problematic here, and I need to change something. And that, I think, was the biggest impact of a wellness retreat on him. It created more awareness of self-medication and giving you insight into healthier options. to deal with what we have to deal with everyday life when it comes to stress. So I thought that was quite powerful, because I'm sure a lot of people could relate to that. But with regards, what came up for me with what you just said is resistance to change, because I know a lot of us human beings struggle with that. We know it's good for us, but there's that barrier or self-sabotage that gets in the way of change. How do you work with that?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I mean, it's a space that I still work in a lot. I think for me, it's been helpful just to study the psychology of change a little bit. I tend to be a fairly analytical person, and so I like to kind of know what human tendencies are and how the mind tends to work, and that usually helps me to see within myself those same tendencies. And so with change, it's a fairly predictable experience. And we've seen it in our culture. People talk about 21 days to change or 30 days to change. And I don't know if it's as simple as that, but essentially, anytime you make a change, you feel it. There are two terms in psychology. They talk about contrast and habituation. Mm-hmm. Habituation is anything that you do as a pattern, of course, becomes the way you are, and it'll tend to become unconscious. So for example, having a couple of drinks every evening, if that's what you do, you probably hardly notice it. It just becomes a habitual pattern. Mm-hmm. Now, contrast is anytime you try to change that pattern, you're going to feel it. Mm-hmm. It tends to be that when we make a change for good, like if we have a choice to make a change, then we're going to feel some high from that. Let's say we go, you come to Aroha and you spend a week without alcohol, you're going to feel really good. You'll kind of, set some great intentions to make some change, and, I'm not going to drink as much anymore. And you'll leave on a real high. And then there's a tendency within those first few days to a week for that habituation to kick back in, and for there to be struggle and for there to be challenge. And it looks a little bit like an exponential curve. Basically, the days early on will be the hardest to create change. And the longer you hold that change, the easier it gets over time. And for myself, I'm working on kind of 2 years, basically not drinking. And it almost feels like nothing. I'm well over the hump. I would say with something really ingrained, if you were like me and you really enjoy great glasses of wine and great food, and you'd been trained, and I had a full love affair with alcohol. I would say realistically, it took me 3 to 6 months for me not to be thinking about it at all. And so now I can go to dinner and people can have wine and they can offer me wine and things of that sort. It really is not uncomfortable at all. I don't. It doesn't bother me, And so I just think it's good to know that that's a possibility, that any habit you have, no matter how ingrained, no matter how consistent, no matter how many of your years you've had that habit for, you can change it, And if you think, imagine if once a year you chose just one habit and you dedicated that year to changing that one habit, and if you picked the kind of the most effective habit, the lowest hanging fruit, the biggest bang for a buck, 5 years down the road, you'd be a completely different person. Because 5 big habits are monumental to change. So it's there for us all. And people, I guess, use a lot of different methodologies to get the change to happen. But for me, it's just like dogged determination. Just like, and picking one habit at a time and really focusing in on it.
Yeah, and also having that sense of accomplishment. I think if you try to do too many too soon, it just gets overwhelming and you feel like you're continuously chasing your tail. But in terms of abstaining, I know a lot of crew, they would love to achieve something like that, but the culture that exists, it's huge drug taking and alcohol taking culture, and you feel a lot of peer pressure. And it's also a sense of losing a part of your identity, especially if you've been in the industry for so long. So that's what you did in your 20s. Now in your 30s, you're looking for change, you're looking for something different, and you're not quite sure what it is. And you want to start off with not drinking because it doesn't feel right. And instead of being hungover, you want to go to a yoga class in the morning or go on an adventure. But they struggle with that idea of peer pressure and saying no and feeling left out, or people making comments about it. How do you work through that?
I mean, I would say I felt exactly the same, and and even the choice to decide to quit drinking was quite challenging for me. There was a lot of resistance there, and I'm 44, so I drank for whatever, from my teens all the way through to 42, and so and I'm a health and wellness professional, so that's how hard it was to make that decision. But what I would say, what I can tell you is, once you get over the curve, what you'll find is, first of all, you will inspire people. I promise. Like, every single one of us will inspire others, because you're not the only one that's feeling hungover. We're not the only ones that, like, we're all having the same experience with alcohol, where we, wake up, we feel terrible, we spend a lot of money, we did things we didn't, we're not proud of, et cetera, et cetera. So that whole pattern is being shared, even by those who are adamant drinkers. And so, not to say that all of your friends will quit drinking because you will, but you'd be surprised at how your interactions shift and how you end up inspiring people. And I was inspired by someone. There was one particular friend of mine who really, without preaching or telling me I needed to stop drinking, there was none of that. He was basically just made the choice and he quit, and I watched him do it, and I thought, wow, that's very cool. And so I know that just in that same way that I've had that same kind of effect on people, and ultimately, like, wherever your drinking buddies are, you can still hang out with them, and within a few months, whoever your posse is, they'll know that you're not drinking, and they'll stop asking, and they'll stop bugging you, and you're just gonna, it takes a little bit of time. It's that same part of the curve. You're just kind of re-educating your friends as to how you are, and then you're having soda water with lime, or you're having kombucha. I'm pretty sure my kombucha intake, was like tenfold in that first year, because I always wanted to have something in my hand.
Yeah.
It's definitely possible.
Yeah, I know, that's good to know. What also came up for me is that a male friend of mine said yesterday that drinking is great because it helps people open up and talk about things that you don't normally talk about. Now, for someone like me who's in this space, I don't have any issue about talking about the deep and meaningful. It's not scary for me, it's natural. Whereas for this particular person, and I'm wondering if it's a male thing, an example he said was he could be having several drinks with his mates, and then they start talking about, sex. They're not having sex with their partners at the moment, but that would not be a topic of conversation if you're sober. So what would you have to say to something like that? Because I don't know if it's a justification or if it's actually true. Yeah, it's, you become more open to those sort of conversations. You have the confidence to go there, but you don't when you're sober.
Yeah, I mean, I think, social lubricant is real. We certainly use alcohol to feel comfortable in our own skin. And I think it's really great just to notice that. I mean, first of all, just for me, one of my most powerful practices is just to hold the truth to the light. To say to yourself, wow, I'm not comfortable in social situations unless I'm drunk. Sometimes we say it as a joke, like, oh no, I only dance if I'm drunk. And, but to really kind of reflect on that and say, okay, so what is it that alcohol is allowing me to be or to do that I can't do on my own? And am I sure that there's no other way? Ultimately, we're, I would call this spiritual practice. We're looking to kind of unlock and unravel and do exactly what you're talking about here, in kind of creating freedom in this life, and drugs and alcohol, they give us freedom. The problem is it's very short, and then we come crashing back down, and we have to, deal with the other side of that. So one question would be, like, is it possible to have that sort of delight and that sort of playfulness and that sort of openness and freedom without drugs and alcohol? And I would really, just kind of sit with that question. Is it possible? We certainly see it. We see examples of people who are light, whether they're young or whether they're old. You see, like, the really cute old couple that are still having fun. They're not the rule, they're kind of the anomaly. but just the fact that it's possible kind of holds up this possibility. I've been thinking, this is kind of a funny story. I've been thinking about creating a holiday. You know how they have November, and we have all these kind of funny holidays where you kind of pick a day and you do something weird. So my thought is that we create a fake drunk holiday. And on this particular day, haven't come up with a good catchy name yet, but we basically all go out and we fake drunk. So we just friggin' throw caution to the wind and have fun and like dance on the table and like hit on the pretty girl and do whatever the heck we want to do, you know, and let the boisterous laughter out. And I played around with it a couple of times just personally, and I've just kind of like decided to pretend like I was slightly drunk, you know, and it's a hoot. It's totally fun. I highly recommend it. Until the holiday comes along, that's a tool you can use.
It's really clever, because I know you do really fun activities at Aroha as part of the itinerary, and I wasn't able to attend the animal one, but I heard lots about it, and everyone was laughing, and they got a lot of joy out of it. But obviously, maybe this example wouldn't be fitting for a retreat, but the idea, I think the similarities from what I've heard with that particular exercise, it's letting go of your inhibitions and just being comfortable being out of the norm without a crutch, you know? So I think that's really powerful. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, you could say Aroha is like a playground for adults.
Yes.
You know, we're basically going, it's like we're going to camp again. And just like when we were kids and you just got to get outside and play and frolic and, you know, meet great friends and have a good time. It's just an adult version.
Yeah, it's just truly beautiful. Thank you so much for this part of the conversation, because I think it's so relevant in our industry, and to explore that on a deeper level, I think is going to be of great benefit to the crew.